Right. Okay, so I'm not Jerry Hobbs. I'm only introducing Jerry Hobbs. Hi, it's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Jerry Hobbs is visiting us from the Information Sciences Institute, ISI, at USC, where he's been for the last 5 years. Before that, he was at SRI, where, of course, they had a large group working on, I guess you could call it AI and NLP and things of that sort, and he's a past president of ACL, and he just told me that if I wanted to go further back, I could mention that he has his PhD from NYU, but of course we know him for all his NLP work, and I'll just let you take it from here. Jerry?
Thank you. I have a handout, actually. Well, not quite. I mean, I just want you to have a chance to the text I'm going to do is not easy. So Johns Hopkins is the hotbed of statistical NLP, probably more so than any place, with the possible exception of ISI. And so I figured I'd better not talk about statistical NLP here, or I'll get ripped to shreds. So but if I'm going to give something symbolic here, then it's going to sound like it comes from outer space. So I figured, well, then I might as well give a talk that does come from outer space. So that's why I'm talking about when will computers understand Shakespeare. And what I'd like to do is take a look at one particular poem of Shakespeare's and ask the question of how well we would do currently and how well we can hope to do in the near future on understanding various aspects of the poem that would count as part of what it would be to understand the poem. So it's Shakespeare's 64th sonnet, which I will read. It's actually a poem about entropy. I mean, the summary is that he looks around and he sees that there are all these things that you would think would be permanent, and they're falling apart. And that leads him to think that the love that he has now is also going to disappear at some point, and that makes him feel very sad. So the poem is, when I have seen by time's fell hand defaced the rich proud cost of outworn buried age, when sometime lofty towers I see down raised and brass eternal, slave to mortal rage, when I have seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore, and the firm soil win of the watery main, increasing store with loss and loss with store, when I have seen such interchange of state, or state itself confounded to decay, ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate, that time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death, which cannot choose but weep to have that which it fears to lose. All right, so by the way, did everybody get a handout? Have they made it all the way around? Were there enough? What I'd like to do is consider kind of some of the phenomena that occur in any text, and in particular occur in for the most part, in very problematic forms in this text. So I want to look first at parsing and discovering the syntactic structure, then at generating a logical form for the text, then at problems of co-reference, then interpreting the predicate-argument relations in the text and some of the interpretive moves that we have to make in order to make sense of the text, and then to look at various kinds of coherence, in particular clause internal coherence and then the interclausal coherence structure of the poem, just to see kind of how far we've come and how far we have to go. I mean, I was saying to somebody earlier, this would be an uninteresting talk if, we can deal with this, no problem. It would also be an uninteresting talk if the conclusion were, we can't even begin to touch this. But as it happens, I think the truth is somewhere in between, and so that should make it interesting. So, well, the first thing to say is when you try to parse this, you can't, right? Because, I mean, the first 12 lines constitutes the first sentence. And you're not going to parse a sentence that long. And you're not going to parse a sentence that complicated. But what I did was I ran it with Charniak's parser and kept kept cutting it down and down and down until I got a sentence that did parse correctly. And what I ended up with all of the content of the poem, but something is lost in the translation, were these sentences. I have seen that the rich, proud cost of outworn, buried age is defaced by time's fell hand. I see sometime lofty towers down raised. I see that brass eternal is slave to mortal rage. I have seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore. I have seen the firm soil win of the watery main, increasing store with loss. By the way, watery, this apostrophe just, it interpreted as as a possessive every time, and there was no way to get the Charniak's parser to do anything else but that. So I had to add the E to watery. That's one of the only two words I had to change. I have seen the firm soil win of the watery main, increasing loss with store. I have seen such interchange of state. The state itself is confounded to decay. So this all sounds a lot more like Walt Whitman than Shakespeare. Actually, the last few lines it did pretty well on. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate. The time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. For some reason, the Charniak parser, when given the word cannot, doesn't get it as a modal. It treats it as an adverb. And so the only way to deal with it that I could figure out was to break it apart. So in a way, that's not bad. I mean, we get all the content and we get the right structure for these sentences that, in any case, are at least somewhat close. Why won't the main thing parse? The poem as it is parse? Well, the big problem is the length. As I said, the first 12 lines are one sentence, and something that long is not going to parse in current technology. Then the inversions always caused it a lot of problems. So sometime lofty towers I see down raised instead of sometime I see lofty towers down raised. It had a lot of trouble with small clauses. So I see brass eternal, slave to mortal rage. I think it took that as brass eternal slave as a single noun phrase, and then to mortal rage as a modifier on that. And then, parsers of every variety have a lot of trouble with conjunctions, and this was no exception here. So increasing store with loss and loss with store, for example, was parsed with, so it's store with loss and loss with store, right? So it conjoined loss and loss, and then had the final with store modifying the second loss, rather than.
Both of your last two examples were conjunction of what in the Penn tree bank are not constituents. Increasing store with loss. Store with loss isn't a constituent.
Right.
And a small clause wouldn't be considered a constituent either, I believe. And that's conjoined here. I see lofty towers down raised.
I think I'm not sure. I mean, the Charniak parser on small clauses sometimes it gets it as a constituent, and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah, I don't know what the instructions on the Penn tree bank were, but
well, here it says that you have the adjective inversion, so it parses the noun phrase.
actually the adjective inversion in brass eternal didn't give it any problems.
But you said it got.
No, it got problem with the small clause, the brass eternal slave to mortal rage. It screwed up on that. But when I changed that to, I see that brass eternal is slave to mortal rage, it had no trouble with brass eternal having the postposed adjective. So my general conclusion about the parsing is that it's not too bad. I mean, it made some mistakes, but but it did get something, and you didn't have to change it in very radical ways in order to get the parser to actually work. And insofar as we can parse it, it is straightforward to translate it into logical form, making explicit the predicate-argument relations and making inference possible. Straightforward is a favorite word of mine, actually. It characterizes the things that I think can be done in a day, but whenever I try to do them, I'm still working on them a year later. So what we've been doing in the last year is working on generating logical form from the Charniac parsers in general. And what it's led me to conclude is that the Penn tree bank annotations, and therefore parse trees produced by statistical parsers trained on the Penn tree bank, are barely more than glorified part-of-speech taggers. I mean, there's no structure in the left half of noun phrases. So, for example, in internal combustion engine, you don't know whether it's the combustion that's internal or the engine that's internal. There's no complement adjunct distinction. So, you know, I was mugged by a lamppost versus I was mugged by a man in a black coat. You don't know, you know, you can't tell whether it's an adjunct or provides an argument. Gap filler relations are unmarked. The presence of gaps are unmarked. So if you have something like the book that I left versus the idea that I left, where in the first of them you need to know that there's a gap there that gets filled by the book. I left the book. Whereas in the idea that I left is preposterous. You don't have a gap there. And when you're just looking at the parse tree, they look alike. These two constituents look alike in the Charniac parser. So that's a problem. And then this elegant generalization from Chomsky in linguistics, S-bar, covers questions, relative clauses, subordinate clauses, that clauses, and other things. And all these have different translations into the logical form. So the fact that, you know, you somehow recognize this elegant generalization has really put you in an unfortunate position with respect to generating the logical form. And finally, because the trees are so flat, you get thousands of patterns. You know, you get, you know, verb phrase goes to verb, NP, PP, PP, something adverbial, some adverbial clause, something else, and you know the combinatorics of that, you know, give you thousands upon thousands of rules. So what we did was, first of all, a three-step process. That first of all inserts lexical information from a dictionary that we compiled from a dictionary that I had from SRI's dialogic system in the 1980s, plus the Comlex that Ralph Grishman developed at New York University, plus a rather massive dictionary that Maurice Gross put together for English, which doesn't have a lot of information, but it does have morphological information. Tends to be very useful. So the first step is to insert that lexical information, and then to binarize the parse tree with tree transformations like rules like this, which will take something like a verb phrase here, peel off the final prepositional phrase and separate that out so you get more of a binary tree, and thereby minimizing the number of rules that you're going to have to cope with. And this phase also passes lexical information up the tree to places where it's going to be needed for translation, and also passes structural information down the tree. So, for example, John is left versus John has left. It's important, again, to know, you know, whether you've got the transitive or intransitive verb, to know whether, you know, it's going to have that second argument. And you don't know locally in the parse tree. You can't tell unless you've passed the information down as to whether it's in the, you know, the structure for the perfect aspect, or whether it's in the passive. And then, having done this, we then generate the logical form using a software that we've developed called LF Toolkit, or Logical Form Toolkit. The basic idea behind this program is that the individual words in a sentence provide fragments of logical form. So the word lofty tells you that there's an x1 such that lofty of x1. The word towers, ignoring the plurals, tells us there's an x2 such that tower of x2. And the word fall tells you that there's a falling event by something x3, the thing that falls. So the lexical output rules of LF Toolkit produce essentially logical form fragments like this. And then what the composition rules in syntax, the S goes to NP, VP, the VP goes to verb NP, what they tell you is identity among these variables. So when you recognize that this is an adjective that goes with this noun, that's telling you that x1 equals x2. So now you know that it's the tower that's lofty. And then when you recognize that this noun phrase combines with this verb phrase to form a sentence, that tells you that x2 is the same as x3, and that's what tells you that the tower is what falls. So this is the basic idea behind LF Toolkit. It was developed by a student of mine, Nishit Rathod. So here's what it produces for the sentence. I have seen that the rich, proud cost of outworn, buried age is defaced by time's fell hand. This is the Charniak parse tree of that. And what we get is that there's this guy, x2, which is described as I. There's this event in which x2 sees e7. Call that event e3. That e3 is in the perfect aspect, which means something like it's still relevant to the present time, and that perfect aspect is in the present. All right, then we had this event E7, and what it is a defacing by somebody, we don't know yet, just from syntax, but call it X13, and that defacing is in the present. And E7, the thing that's being defaced is E7, and that is a cost, which is proud and rich, and kind of mutually identifiable by this description. And it's of X12, which is an age, and it's outworn, and it's something or someone, X17, buried it. And furthermore, the defacing is by X15, which is a hand, and is fell, and is possessed by X18, which is time. Okay, well, I mean, some of the poetry is lost in this, I admit. Right, but it captures the meaning of the sentence, and then makes explicit the predicate argument relations.
So it looks like X17 is left hanging, right? I don't see where it is.
Yeah, I mean some things are left hanging.
And is it because you chose a particular phrase for buried?
Yeah, I mean buried is in the passive, which means that some agent is burying this thing. And we're not told what's burying it. We might be able to figure that out when we start doing inferences, but the syntax doesn't tell us.
I was wondering whether there was another frame of bury where there would not be an explicit actor.
You can take any passive verb form and treat it as an adjective if you want to, but it seems to me more interesting. I mean, we in fact might find out what it is that's burying the age. Yeah.
So I don't know how much you want to talk about LF Toolkit and the particular logical forms that you're getting here. So should I ask questions?
Go ahead. If I don't want to talk about it, I'll refuse to answer.
Sorry?
If I don't want to talk about it, I'll refuse to answer.
Okay, yeah. So I would have thought that the particular scheme that you're talking about is too simple to work, in that when I teach compositional semantics, I have all these lambda terms and Montague types.
Yeah. I mean, the function of lambda terms, look, what function application does in categorical grammar is identify variables. That's all it does, right? So when I'm identifying these variables here, yeah, I mean, I could say, all right, this is a function that applies to something that's generated some logical form fragment in lambda calculus that's generated here, but all that's going to happen up here when I apply the functions is that these variables get identified. And it seems to me it's just bonkers to use this heavy-duty formalism when the idea behind it is really so simple.
I can see how you might be able to do a transformation for things like quantification. I'd have to try to write something down to convince myself it goes through, but it does go through. You end up having some small predicates that say that some variable is quantified by something else, and then that variable is...
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. I mean, what I generate, the logical forms I generate are flat conjunctions of atomic propositions that are existentially quantified on all the variables. So the quantifier structure that's there has to be represented by kind of reifying universally quantified variables as to kind of type elements that have properties that are inherited by the elements of the set, and that gets quite complicated. And so that's something I won't describe in greater detail.
Is there any problem in recognizing quantifier scope or...
Yeah, so you can't recognize quantifier scope in syntax anyway. It's something you have. So what I try to do is generate a logical form that is neutral with respect to scope, and then it may be one of these functional dependencies of one variable on another are something that you may or may not discover in the course of your inferencing.
Good. I like the way it is. Thanks.
So now I want to look at the various problems of co-reference. There are some easy cases. One is this time. I mean, they're two proper names, and they're pretty straightforward to recognize. They have identical descriptions. Similarly, the I here, I, me, my. Down here, this thought, you'd like to know that it's a thought of mine, as opposed to a thought of my lover or a thought of some other random person. That would require some sort of inference that, for example, to know that if X thinks Y, then X is a person. But that still doesn't solve it because we have one person for sure, which is my love might also be a person. I mean, it might be my car, because people can love anything, but it could be a person, and so maybe it's a thought of the person. So that's a little harder. This an algorithm that I proposed back in 1976, would resolve this to say that it's identical with the which, whatever which refers to, and which refers to. Well, that depends on how you attach it, whether it's attached to death or thought, and that's ambiguous. But it's a fairly benign ambiguity because the thought is at least similar to death, if not identical to it. I mean, the thought is as a death. So you would at least almost get the right reference of it by fairly simple means. There are harder cases that you need to do some measure of inferencing for. So when I've seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore and the firm soil win of the watery main increasing store with loss and loss with store, you'd like to know that the ocean and the main are the same. Now, one of the major resources that people use in trying to do inferencing in natural language is WordNet. And Sanda Harabaju and Dan Moldovan at Language Computer Corporation translated the glosses in WordNet, or the definitions of the words, into predicate calculus axioms, and reported substantial success using these for doing inferencing and question answering. So suppose we can do the same sort of thing. Then we look at the WordNet glosses for ocean and for main. Ocean is a large body of water constituting the Earth's hydrosphere, something like that. Main is this particular sense, is a very large body of salt water. So these are pretty straightforward, I would think, to match with each other, and you could figure out that the ocean and the main are probably the same thing. You'd also like to figure out that the shore and the soil is at least part of the shore, or on the shore, or is the shore. So we look at the glosses for that, and we get tantalizingly close. And a lot of the cases where I'm looking in, where I look in WordNet for the linkage that I want, you know, I get tantalizingly close, but not quite there. So in this case, the shore is the land along the edge of a body of water. You look up land and it says it's the solid part of the Earth's surface. Solid is not soft or yielding to pressure. You look up soil and you say the part of the Earth's surface consisting of humus and a rock is a lump or mass of hard consolidated material. Now, if only you knew that soft and hard were antonyms, then maybe you would have enough there to make that linkage and realize that the soil and the shore are the same thing. But at the time I first looked at this, these were not then coded as antonyms in WordNet. Now, Christiane Feldbaum has seen a copy of these slides, so she may have added that into WordNet now. I don't know. Sorry? Yes?
Isn't it firm soil that is shown? What happened to firm?
Yeah, no, right, yeah, firm soil, right. But in a way, the firm and the soil are highly redundant.
Well, firm in this case is a non-restrictive adjective. So it's the soil, comma, which is firm.
Yeah, right.
It's not firm soil as distinguished from
Yeah.
some other kind of soil.
Soft soil.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. You might be able to chase through a line on firm and get something that matches up somewhere that you would get with shore. That's possible. I didn't do that. All right, then we have these last 4 lines. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate. The time will come and take my love away. This thought of mine is as a death which cannot choose but weep that which it fears to lose. So you'd like to know, well, first of all, the syntax. Suppose you were able to handle this inversion and you got ruin hath taught me to ruminate thus, comma, the time will come and take my love away. So you'd recognize that this clause here is in a positive on thus. Then and is the object of ruminate. Then a thought, of course, if X, a thought is a Y such that X thinks Y. So it's the object of think. And then if I can link up ruminate and think, then I should be able to recognize the co-reference here of the me and the mine, the implicit mine, the thought, and the thing that is ruminated. And as it happens, ruminate is in WordNet is in the same sin set as a number of other things, including think over, although not think. And maybe you'd be happy with think over. Maybe that's enough to get you the linkage. There's also a non-co-reference problem here, and you know it would be curious. It would be very unlikely that any technique used today that could get the other examples of co-reference would not make a mistake on this, right? I mean, it's important. It's an important part of understanding the poem here to know that these two states are not the same, and in fact don't mean the same thing. So when I have seen such interchange of state, here we mean state in the 4th sense in WordNet, which is the way something is with respect to its main attributes, kind of the abstract state that we're familiar with.
Solid
And
and liquid in this case.
sorry?
In this case, solid and liquid.
Well, if you wanted to interpret it literally with respect to the previous example, yeah, but I mean, I think in this case, I think it means something much more general. Or state itself confounded to decay, where this state means, I would have thought it meant, and certainly the closest sense in WordNet is a politically organized body of people under a single government. But in the footnotes of the book that I have says that what Shakespeare meant by state was majesty or royalty or splendor. It's close to the current meaning of state, but it's a bit different, but certainly different from the first state. All right, the next area is interpreting predicate-argument relations. And so the kinds of issues that arise here are a kind of vivification or predicate strengthening that we want to do when we encounter the vague predicates that just pervade natural language discourse. So one of them is the concept of. If I say the wall of a tower, in order to really understand this word of, we have to know that in this context, it means that the wall is part of the tower. Other examples of such vague predicates are the possessive, or the word have, or the word at, or the implicit relation between the nouns and a compound nominal. So in a combustion engine, what's the relation between combustion and engine? And so an important part of understanding discourse is understanding these vague predicates. Then there's the issue of metonymy. So when we say we read Shakespeare, what we really mean is something like we read the plays of Shakespeare, we read the poetry of Shakespeare. And again, this is pervasive in natural language. You know, does this restaurant take American Express? Well, you know, it's not going to take over the company American Express. I mean, certainly, you know, what you mean is does it take credit cards issued by American Express? There's metaphor. Time marches on means that time shares, well, only people can march, and so time must have some aspect that's similar to an aspect that people have, and in this case it would be motion. And then there's predicate loosening or hyperbole. So time flies, you really mean time moves fast, and you want to somehow tap into your knowledge that if something flies, then it's moving fast. And my argument here is that with the right knowledge and the right choice function, both of those are huge problems. But if you had those two, then these problems could be solved. So here's the idea in interpretation as abduction is that the way we understand the world is we kind of do this inference process called abduction, which is inference to the best explanation, where we try to find the best explanation for the observables. And in this view, the observables in the text are its logical form, and what we have to do, the explanation is a proof of it. But there's going to be new information in the text, and so we're not going to be able to prove it completely, but we're allowed to make assumptions. And then we have a cost function on that, on the proofs that tells us which the best proof is. So here's an example of a wall of the tower. So there's a wall X and a tower Y, and X is of Y. And suppose we know in our knowledge base that if X is part of Y, then X is of Y. That is, part of is one possible specialization of. That buildings have walls that are part of them, and that a tower is a building. Then we can assume that there's a tower, and that from that we conclude that there's a building, and therefore there's a wall, and that gives us this. And that wall is part of the tower, and that part of the tower can be realized by the more abstract predicate of that appears here. So we have a proof, and it's a fairly economical proof because it only required us to make this one assumption, and it solves as a byproduct. It gives us this the predicate strengthening that we wanted for of. Okay. Here's an example of metonymy. Let's see how. So I read Shakespeare. So I'm reading this X. No, I'm sorry. Somebody X is reading. There's a reading event E by somebody of Shakespeare. Let's see how to go through this. So this is essentially the way you do syntax, and it's kind of like feature structures in head-driven phrase structure grammar. But basically this says if E is a reading event by X of Z, so X is reading Z and E is that event, then you can describe E by the word read, providing you find something in the subject position that describes X and something in the object position that describes Z. And it's when we do these compositions like this that we find the right arguments. Now this is where the metonymy happens. What this says is that if I'm using if I want to express some relation to z here, and y is somehow related to z, then I can describe y instead. Okay, so instead of talking about the plays of Shakespeare or the poetry of Shakespeare, I can just refer to Shakespeare himself. And so but that means we have to find some relation between, all right, now this text is a constraint on the use of the word read. The thing that you read has to be a text. Now, suppose we know that Shakespeare wrote poetry. This writing gives us the relation we need between Shakespeare and the poetry, and this tells us that poetry is a text. So we get the right metonymic interpretation that what I read here is not Shakespeare, Y, but the poetry of Shakespeare, Z, where the coercion was the writing relation. A couple of notes about metonymy. Metonymy operates not on words, but on predicate argument structures. So I like to read Shakespeare, who lived in Elizabethan times. We don't want to say, I like to read, I got a course, the poetry of Shakespeare, and the poetry of Shakespeare lived in Elizabethan times. That doesn't work. It was Shakespeare, the person that lived in Elizabethan times. So it's really, the metonymy really operates on the predicate argument relations, and we have two here, the I read Shakespeare and Shakespeare lives in Elizabethan times. This one we have to coerce into I read the poetry of Shakespeare. In this one there's no coercion. And the second point is that metonymy is an interpretive move that's always available whether or not there's a selectional violation. So Elizabeth I was a voracious theater goer. She especially liked Shakespeare. Now, it's not a selectional violation for her to like a person, and maybe she in fact did like a person, but in this context, probably we mean that she likes the plays of Shakespeare, even though there's no selectional violation on I like Shakespeare or she likes Shakespeare. Metaphor can be handled in the abductive framework by okay, so here's time marches, and what's going on here is really a kind of coercion as well. So we're saying in general that suppose E2 is a marching event by X. Then we can use the word marches to describe it. And then here's where the coercion happens. We say, well, instead of marches describing E2, I'm going to use marches to describe E1, which is related to E2. And I'm going to tap into this knowledge that marching is a moving. So E1 now, the claim of the sentence now becomes that E1 the claim is now E1, which is the moving rather than marching. So time marches on is really time moves on in some sense. I mean, that's another metaphor that we have to interpret as well, but yeah.
Do you add this implied predicate to every?
Well, in fact, I do. I mean, I leave it out in examples on slides that don't need it. But in fact, I do put something like that into every axiom, and then you can explicitly refer to the implication relation between these. And it is the implication relation that provides the coercion from the marching to the moving. The predicate loosening is a very similar, in fact, it's exactly the same story where we're loosening it, the interpretation for time flies from time flies to time moves fast, where the coercion is, again, the implication relation. So now I want to look at the various predicate argument relations in the poem. These in the first two lines, these are the relations that we have. So when I have seen by time's fell hand deface the rich proud cost of outworn buried age, we have this I see a defacement. Well, there's no problem there because persons can see states and events. So let's let that pass. The hand is defacing the cost. Well, that doesn't make sense as is. We have to coerce the hand into the owner of the hand, something capable of some kind of agency. and then coerce that into the effects of time's actions. Well, the only thing time can do is pass. So kind of the effects of passage of time is what time's hand gets coerced into. For cost, we have to coerce that into artifacts of high cost. And now we have that an agent or an event like time's passage can deface artifacts, and that's fine. That kind of goes through. Time's hand, we would like to strengthen the possessive to kind of body part of. We have to interpret time metaphorically as a person on the basis of the shared property with a person that they can cause change. And similarly, the fell hand, well, fell means kind of causing destruction. So we have to coerce the hand into the action of the owner of the hand, which is time. And so again, we get the change caused by time's passage. In cost, as the cost is rich and the cost is proud, we have to coerce cost into one who pays the cost and infer from that that it's a high cost, because the one who pays the cost is rich and proud. The cost of the age is we have to strengthen that to originating in this time period, in a time period, and then coerce cost to the artifacts of high cost as we did up here. So now it becomes artifacts of high cost originating in the time period of this age. And then the buried and outworn age, we again have to coerce age to objects originating in the age, which is kind of the same as the artifacts originating in the time period. So on the one hand, there's a lot of work we have to do in metonymic and interpretation and strengthening relations and so on. But on the other hand, we have a very high degree of redundancy that kind of allows us to kind of hone in on particular relations. So the next two lines, when sometime lofty towers I see down raised and brass eternal slave to mortal rage, all of these relations are okay. They don't violate anything. Here we get the brass is slave to rage, and we have to coerce rage into the destruction that rage causes, loosen slave to something like controlled by, and then mortal rage. Mortal is one of these noun-like adjectives, which really means, well, it has something to do with death. So it's kind of like a compound nominal. It's as though we said death rage. And you have to figure out what the relation between death and rage is. And so we have this NN relation that we want to strengthen somehow. And we'll strengthen it to causes, namely, I guess the rage causes death. So we coerce rage into death caused by rage, and we get that the death caused by rage causes destruction to the brass. Yeah.
That's one interpretation, although I think
Yeah.
another one might be, which shows that this is under constraint, that the mortal is to be contrasted with eternal. So the rage is the rage of mortals who are only ephemeral, and yet they can destroy the eternal things.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah. I almost like that better.
Right. So rather than always having mortal to do with death, then you would also have to liken it with things whose distinguishing property is the ability to die.
Right.
Or the property of
Can overcome, such weak things can overcome even something as eternal as brass. Yeah, that's nice. The next one, when I have seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore and the firm soil, wind of the watery main, so gain advantage, the ocean gaining advantage on the kingdom of the shore, we have to loosen kingdom to a region ruled, well, a kingdom is a region ruled by a king, so forget the king and just focus on the region. To gain advantage on is to increase a scalar quantity with respect to. So we increase in relative size with respect to. The hungry ocean, the ocean is interpreted metaphorically as animate, and therefore it's consuming something, and therefore there's going to be a smaller amount left, and that corresponds to, that basically conveys the same thing as increase in relative size with respect to. This kingdom of the shore, the region of the shore, the of is, we have to figure out, is the of identity, like the city of Baltimore. And the firm soil, well, these two are okay. So we get the interpretation of those. When I have seen such interchange of state or state itself confounded to decay, let me look at something is confounding the state into decay. So it's caused by confounding the decaying of the state. Confounding is, to confound something is to make orderly structures more chaotic. Decay is the loss of a structure and a structured entity. State as a governmental body is or as a system of procedures in a hierarchical system is a structured entity. So what we're saying is that there's something that is causing us to lose this, lose structure in this structured entity of the state. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate, the time will come and take my love away. So in the time will come, this is a personification based on the motion of the time or of a human, a personification of time. We have to interpret here as this argument of, the destination of the coming as here where I am, but we can get that from both the presuppositions of come and also the enabling conditions of taking something away. If you're going to take something away from me, you have to come to where I am in order to do it. And again, time is, well, all right, so then time takes my love from me. We have to, taking is a change from I have my love to I don't have my love. Then we have to strengthen have to be in some sort of reciprocal relationship with. And time, again, is coerced into the passage of time and the events that occupy it. So all this is what's doing affecting the change from my being in this relationship with my love to my not being in it. In what sense do I possess my love in my love? Well, I have to strengthen the possession relation to the predicate argument relation. I mean, my love is the X such that I love X. And we have to get that, that's what the relation between I, this love relation is the relation between I and X. That's the strengthening of the possession. And the other predicate argument relations are unproblematic there, or less problematic. And then finally, and that time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. We have to figure out what the similarity is between the thought and the death. Well, they're similar in kind of the dread one feels. Cannot choose but weep. We have to figure out that this Shakespearean phraseology is something like cannot choose not to weep. That is, must weep. If for a thought to weep, we have to coerce that into the thinker. We have to interpret. This is another bit of Shakespearean phraseology that to have we have to interpret as so weep at having that which it fears to lose, and the at then gets interpreted or strengthened to the causal, to kind of a causality or causal relation. So, and I knew at a glance. The glance causes me to know, and similarly we have the having causes me to weep. Again, the thought fears to lose. It's really the thinker that fears to lose. People can fear events, that's okay. And the thought loses something. Well, a losing is a change from having something to not having it. And this, in fact, is the same interpretation as we got from this take up here. And so if we recognize those as describing the same event, then we figure out that what's at issue here, what's going to be lost is my love. So next I want to look at, so that was actually the bulk of the detailed analysis, and the next few things aren't, I won't go into as much detail. There are a number of coherence relations that happen between the eventualities, the states and events that are described in discourse. And typically these relations are things like causality or their negation. So something like time passed and the pages became worn and yellow, where the first clause provides the cause for the second. Time had passed, but she looked as beautiful as ever, where you'd expect some causality, but there's not. Similarity and its negation in contrast, and instances of general principles. So the paintings were flaking and the statues were cracked, so this is a kind of similarity there. The wall had collapsed, but the statue is still standing. There's a contrast there because of a lack of similarity that you might expect. There's an occasion relation between eventualities where one sets up the occasion for another, or kind of sets up a change of state. So I turned to the third act and began to read. I really couldn't begin to read the third act until I turned to it. There's the figure-ground and ground-figure relation. The field spread out before us. It was filled with soldiers. And then predicate-argument relations. Pat didn't like Hamlet. I don't understand that, where you're making a predication in the second sentence about the entity introduced in the first, or the situation described in the first. So we get a lot of these coherence relations inside, internal to clauses, and that's what, in fact, makes it such a dense poem. So when I've seen by time's fell hand, there's defaced. The time is really the cause of the defacing, so we have a kind of implicit causal relation here. Defacing is an instance of being fell, so there's a strong relation here between the fell and the defaced. There's a causal relation between the time in some time and the being down raised, because it is time that knocks these towers down. And then we have a contrast that runs through the first four lines between a contrast between valuable and intact things and things getting broken. So we have the rich, proud cost and the lofty towers and the brass eternal. And we have the broken, things getting broken, the fell, defaced, the outworn, buried, downraged, slave to mortal rage. We have a causal relation between hungry and gaining, since it's the hunger that causes the consuming that gains. We have a contrast between the firm soil and the watery main. And we have a causal relation down here. It's the fear that causes him to weep. And you'd think that having something good would cause you not to weep, but in fact we have a violation of that causal relation, and the having in fact doesn't. The having in fact causes you to weep rather than not to weep. So we get those kinds of clause internal coherence relations. And then there's the interclausal coherent structure. So again, for the first four lines, what we have is the same internal contrasts leading to recognition of interclausal parallelism. So basically what both of the, there's basically three statements here in these four lines, all of which are instances of the idea that I see that time causes intact and valuable things to break. So we have the intact, rich, proud cost, and the breaking, defacing, and outworn, buried age. The intact and valuable lofty towers, breaking or downraised, brass eternal, etc. So it's a poem about entropy. We get a contrast here between the ocean gaining on the land, when I've seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore, and the land gaining on the ocean and the firm soil wind of the watery main. This line is fairly complicated, but my analysis of it is that increasing store with loss, this store means the ocean, so store means an x such that the ocean has x. So this is the ocean, increasing the ocean with the loss of the land, and it's modifying this gaining and the hungry ocean gaining advantage on the shore. This clause here, the loss with store, well, we have to fill in the increasing loss with store. The loss refers to the loss of the ocean and the gain of the land, and it modifies the winning, the firm soil winning of the watery main. So we get kind of a respectively, this modifies this and this modifies this. So the structure we get from these lines are that we have this that 8A elaborates on 5 and 6, and 8B elaborates on 7. Or you could restructure this and say that we have the contrast between 5, 6, and 7, and we have the contrast between 8A and 8B. And these two things are elaborations because they're both expressing contrasts between the same sorts of things. Lines 9 and 10, well, the first 8 lines, the summary of that would be, I see that time causes intact and valuable things to break. And now I see, when I've seen such interchange of state, well, we have to figure out that the such interchange of state is the breakage of these valuable things, or state itself confounded to decay. What's happening in both of these clauses is that things are changing for the worse. And that's kind of a summary of this first 8 lines. And a summary is a kind of variety of elaboration. It's kind of a reverse variety of elaboration. Then I have sentence 9, line 11. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate that time will come and take my love away. 11 and 12, where ruin in fact refers to the first 10 lines of the poem. That's what's being described there. It's a kind of large-scale co-reference problem. Now, the summary of those first 10 lines where I see time causes intact and valuable things to break, and that really lines up perfectly with this sentence, that the I is like me, see is a cognitive action like ruminating is. Time causes is implicit in the will come, and also in the take. Intact and valuable is, well, an instance of that is my love, and the breakage is the breakage of my bond with my love. So you can see all of this as a kind of instance of this general principle. So what's going on here is that in the first 10 lines I've observed a general principle, and now I'm saying that this causes me to conclude this particular instance of that. And the causality is also explicitly signaled by the when up here that is repeated often in the taught, sort of a cause to learn. And then finally in the last few lines, so I had this observation I made of a general principle, and that caused me to conclude this instance that time is going to come and take my love away. This causes an emotional response to this instant, namely fear, and this causes this emotional response to that emotion, namely weeping. So we get this kind of causal chain in the last few lines of the poem. So the total coherent structure that we get for the entire poem is we had these parallelisms built up in the first stanza, and these contrasts between 5, 6, and 7, and between 8A and 8B, and they were the same contrast of the same sorts of entities, so we get this kind of elaboration. So we get these parallel or similar statements about intact things falling apart. And then we get a summary of that in lines 9 and 10 that are two similar statements of things falling apart in a general sense. And then we get causal relations to lines 11 and 12, and from there to 12 and 13. There are some things that are missing from this analysis. So, for example, I didn't say anything about the displacements that Shakespeare did for rhythm and rhyme. I mean, it would be a very much poorer poem if he hadn't done that, if he had said, when I have seen the rich proud cost of outworn buried age, defaced by time's fell hand. Yeah, already we've lost something. And it's very difficult to see how, we in our current technology would begin to capture something, a phenomenon like this, the sense that we get. There's a very nice, and similarly, the brass eternal versus and eternal brass. There's an interesting device here where he breaks the line in mid-idiom, forcing a decomposition, and forcing you to focus on the word gain instead of simply glomming it together into gain advantage of. The most interesting example I saw of this kind of break was in a newspaper where I was just looking. This was back in the early 80s, and the newspaper was folded, and the headline was, South African Prime Minister declines Nobel Peace Prize. This was in the era of apartheid, when the South African Prime Minister was an absolute brute. And I thought, this can't be, And I picked up the newspaper and opened it up, and I saw the rest of the headline, which was winner Desmond Tutu's request for meeting. Right? So, it's this kind of thing where you read up to the end of the line, you get one interpretation, you read on beyond that, and it forces a new interpretation. And we get something like that here. The repetition and the paradox in this increasing store with loss and loss with store. The repetition here with a change in meaning. There's an interesting hidden echo here between ruin and ruminate. And I think the effect of this depends in part on the low frequency of the syllable RU in English. So these are just some of the things that are missed by this kind of analysis. So a summary of all this analysis is that we have a dense network of metonymy, metaphor, predicate strengthening and loosening, parallelisms, contrast, causal relations. In each individual case, the computational account is possible. A lot of knowledge is required, but mostly it's lexical or near-lexical nature knowledge. Nature of knowledge. There's no deep esoteric knowledge. You don't have to know, where Shakespeare was born or who Queen Elizabeth's prime minister was, or you don't have to know any. It's all stuff that you might expect to find in a dictionary, not stuff that you'd have to go to a dictionary or pre-dictionary in a way. Or what you have to know in order to read a dictionary. You don't have to go to encyclopedia for it. The right paths through the inference space would have to be found, and that's a very hard problem in this kind of knowledge-based or inference-based natural language processing. But on the other hand, the implicit redundancies that are just pervade the analysis of this poem would help you narrow in on the right choices, because every time you find one of these redundancies, you're getting a more economical interpretation and therefore a better interpretation in the abduction picture of thing. So I gave this talk at LREC last year in Genoa, and one of the responses from a colleague was, you haven't even begun to scratch the surface of Shakespeare. If this were the work of a college sophomore, I'd give it an A-. So I thought, college sophomore, A- by a computer. That's okay. Any further questions or comments? Yeah, David.
I have a frivolous comment, which is to be somewhat contrarian, the sentiment in this poem is rather conventional, as are a lot of the sentiments in Shakespeare's sonnets. But that could be a good thing, because the job of an Elizabethan poet is to take rather conventional sentiment and turn it into a work of art.
Right.
So if this poem could be attached to an engraving in an emblem book that shows a half-raised tower or something
Right.
like that, and many people could have written poems on it. Or, for example, both Shelley and his friend wrote poems on Ozymandias, and
Right.
one was good. Could that be a way into this sort of thing that is left out of your analysis?
You mean that one of the things that you'd want to do is recognize what conventional point is,
Right,
is being made
there's
here?
a conventional declarative knowledge, which is,
So everything falls apart. Everything good
Right.
ends. Right. And if that's part of your knowledge, then you'd like to somehow link this poem up with that.
Right, and but
And once you do
hanging
that,
off that piece of conventional knowledge are various expressions of poetic beauty, and you could compare these expressions.
Well, in a way, yeah. Okay. All right. So the idea is that you have this kind of schema, this set of schemas for the kinds of things people write poems about. And one of these schemas is all good things have to end. And so we're just going to read this poem, analyze this poem with respect to that schema and see how well it fits. And we say, lofty towers, good. Defaced, end, etc., etc. And we go down the list, and sure enough, it matches things pretty well. Yeah, I mean that would be another take on it, right? Yeah.
I wonder if there's something of comparable formal structure to be said about all that is conveyed by the choice of the poet to use metonymy, to use metaphor, to use strengthening at the points where it's used. So it's one thing to translate,
Right.
sort of undo
Undo
that.
Yeah.
It's another thing to somehow appreciate what it
the
was
fact
that
that
was
it was
achieved
done. Right.
by doing it the way that it was done and not by the translation of
Right.
And I don't know what kind of information you would consider that to be and how you would want to encode it and what you would want to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, computationally, what would that amount to, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward to say metonymy, aha, metaphor. But to kind of, right, I mean, I have a feeling that our appreciation of the fact that he's used a metonymy or metaphor here goes a lot deeper than that, than just saying, aha, metonymy.
Right, and deeper than what it is that you translate this metonymy
Yeah,
into.
right.
But I don't know how much formal content can be attributed to those aspects of the choice of language. So, I mean, if
Yeah, I mean, the way I would phrase
if
it
you
is,
if you use the word store
uh-huh,
to accomplish what you did, why use that word to do it?
right,
What is in there, and how to express it?
right.
Stick with
Yeah, right. I mean, that's definitely something, and it's hard to figure out, hard to think of how, if you were to capture it, what that would amount to, computationally. Yeah.
I had I guess a kind of general question. Basically, there's a lot of rhetorical work being done in this poem.
Yeah.
One particular piece which you didn't really focus on is, especially between lines 8 and 9, there's kind of a double chiasmus. You have line 8, there's internal chiasmus, store loss, store. But you also have basically lines 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are part A, line 7 is B, and then you have AB in the 8th line. And then when you look at lines 9 and 10, you have line 9. Instead of having this AB, if you take the first 4 lines as A, second 4 lines as B, it gets switched in lines 9 and 10 as far as what they refer to. So I've seen this interchange of state is, ocean goes to shore, shore goes to ocean.
Right.
State confounded to decay is,
Refers back
lofty
to-
towers falling, all this
right,
stuff.
Right.
And because that is, this sort of rhetorical trope that sort of, puts an exclamation mark here that says this is an important break, and that is also used to show there's this transition from I'm talking about some stuff, here's how I'm
Well,
applying it.
it's at the conventional point at the, after line 8.
I guess my point is, do you see sort of use of rhetoric? Sort of identifying, say, I see chiasmus here, therefore, just sort of using rhetoric in order to deal with these kind of interclausal relationships in order to better,
I mean, that would be a nice thing to be able to recognize. Yeah, absolutely, right. And I would think that, I don't know. Yeah, I really haven't thought of how what a formal treatment of that would look like. I mean, I would think it would be somewhere in the coherent structure that you're recognizing kind of the details of the content of this particular segment. That you get this kind of reversal.
Because I can also see with, you're talking about the Trinaic parts are having problems with store with loss, loss with store.
Yeah.
And if you had some addendum, in your gram or somewhere that knew about chiasmus, it would say, that looks like that. They don't kind of know how to break it up.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
So there are lexical cues, right? Because it says seen such interchange of state. So this is now summarizing because such as what?
You
Such as
need to
everything
know.
above.
You need to know that this is an instruction
Or
to find out what the co-reference relation
And then
is.
by the same token has taught me thus to do
Yeah,
it.
and this
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
So I had what's I guess more of an observation. One thing that struck me when you showed the coherent structure for the whole poem was, it's one of these strongly left branching kinds of structures, which is
Right.
kind of opposite what you see in language. But actually, it reminded me of in the early '80s. Lerdahl and Jackendoff did a generative theory of tonal music, and it's exactly the kinds of structures you get all over tonal music. So you have this big block off to the left that's sort of this prolongation of the tonality, and then you have a big cadence at the end, which is sort of the big satisfying closure to the whole piece. And that's just the way tonal music works. And presumably that's because of it works that way because we have some innate disposition to enjoy structures like that.
Yeah.
And this just reminded me that maybe these structures are sort of inherently aesthetically pleasing to us.
That could be. I mean, it's certainly the structure you'd expect mostly in sonnets, for example, where you have this long development and then kind of the punchline at the end.
Right. Certainly. So, so that made me wonder if you could sort of impose a certain amount of top-down, sort of a preference for structures like this, if that would sort of guide your reconstruction of what you anticipate if you're trying to put together a graph like this.
Right,
You
yeah.
might get some guideposts by sort of taking that as a starting point rather than sort of the.
And I suspect that would work pretty well in the sonnets, for example. Jim.
Yeah, I'd like to bring the room down for a minute. What's the status of LF Toolkit?
You can download it if you want. It doesn't come yet with our latest version of the translators, but that should happen in the next month or two.
Just off the ISI site?
Sorry?
Just off the ISI site?
Just go to my website and one of the first links to that.
I'm sorry, how much of this was done with the toolkit? How much was this done by a person?
Oh,
This analysis?
up to the logical form was done with the Charniak parser and the logical and the LF toolkit.
Okay.
So we generated logical form, and I was going to count up and see what the statistics were. Basically, it got 6 of 10 sentences completely correct, and got about 80% of the propositions correct.
So then from there, it's kind of the structure.
And then from there, it's just a manual,
But that's the kind of direction you're going to take with.
Yeah, this is the kinds of problems that we'd like to solve, although probably not at this level of density. And the kind of knowledge that we'd like to build up in a knowledge base. Jason.
Might I ask you to go back to the conclusion slide?
Sure. This one?
Yeah, so I want to ask, I guess, 3 obvious questions. One is easy. I'll just ask them all, and then you can decide what to answer. One is easy, and it's, are you sure you're using the right parser or tree bank, given that it doesn't give you back everything that you need? So there are a lot of the relations that you talked about not being able to recover with the Charniak parser are expressed in dependency tree banks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first one. Second is, I really believe your account of the formally expressed close reading that you've given here, and I'd like to understand better what the computational what the computational cost is of finding, say, the optimal reading. So clearly there's the same issue that you have in parsing, in that you can justify any parse by saying these rules are in my grammar, but there's an exponential explosion of parses, and you need to somehow score them and find the best. So what would the scoring model be, and what would the search algorithm be?
Right.
And finally, the third question is, when you say that most of what's going on here is a lexical or near-lexical nature, do you think that'll hold up when, say, reading the newspaper? I'm not convinced that it will, because of plenty of examples about timeline resolution and some of your own examples about pronoun resolution.
I think, well, on the last question first, I think that 70 to 80% of the, even in technical writing, except for molecular biology, 70 or 80% of the words are ordinary words used in their ordinary senses. And for those, my guess is that what we need is a pretty straightforward lexical knowledge. I mean, I'm surely that we're going to need more technical knowledge, more esoteric knowledge, more complicated knowledge. But I'd be happy just to get the base.
I guess it's not deep knowledge that I'm wondering about, but rather reasoning.
So Harbaju
have...
and Moldovan argued that, or claimed that they never had to. If you don't find the inference that you want within, or the connection that you want within four ply of inference, then you're probably not going to find it. So I doubt if the inferencing is all that deep. I don't know. I mean, that would be my guess. On the choice function, I mean, one reason for giving the talk here is to get some help on the choice function, because that's clearly a matter that has to be determined in part probabilistically.
We happen to be building a weighted theorem prover, so that might be a good thing for you.
Right. But the kinds of factors that you want to take into account are you want to exploit the inherent redundancy in the natural language discourse. You want to favor plausible inferences over implausible ones. You want to favor short proofs over long proofs. You want to favor things that are relevant or salient to the topic over things that aren't. Those are some of the kinds of factors you'd like to take into consideration. But that's certainly an area where, from my standpoint, theory is lacking.
be great to discuss it.
And you had the first question you had was?
Oh, yeah, whether this was just about the particular parser you're using.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, limited experience, and sort of reports from others are that Charniak's parser is the most reliable. But if you know there are dependency parsers that are more reliable, I'd like to hear about them.
Let's take it off then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also sort of, I don't know if I feel as strongly as Jason does, because when you say lexical or near lexical knowledge, you're of course talking about fairly detailed lexical knowledge, right? So even there, though, it's not clear. For example, like, you know, okay, allow X, Y, so probably X is something animate, something that's capable of loving. And then, of course, you can use an inanimate object, like, in this case, time comes to you and does something.
Mm-hmm.
And when do you know that that's okay? I think that's beyond lexical, right? That's.
Well, okay. I mean, I'm thinking of deep lexical, right? You know, so that you know, knowledge that towers have walls, for example, is not exactly lexical.
Right, and that already to me is pretty deep lexical.
Yeah.
And
Okay. And
to think that time can come
I'd
to
want
you.
to go at least that deep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, I was worrying about, I think this is your example, the city council denied the women a permit because they feared versus advocated violence. And that requires reasoning
Right.
about motives. And
It doesn't
in the same way, if
require-
I'm reading an article,
Yeah.
if I'm reading an article in the newspaper about the latest twists and turns in some political campaign,
Yeah.
not only do I have to recall relevant knowledge, let's ignore that, but just putting the events that are mentioned in the article, which is presented in most important first rather than chronologically, just taking those events, reasoning through the tenses and the order of presentation and plausibility to reconstruct some plausible order of events is actually quite difficult and requires something deep. Now, maybe you don't want to recover that.
Now, actually, I think that Leningrad example is a
That's Winograd, sorry.
yeah is actually a good illustration of my point. So the example is, you know, the police prohibited the women from demonstrating because they feared violence. Now, who fears violence, the police or the women? And the account that Winograd originally gave was, you know, said, well, you have to know all about police, and you have to know about demonstrations, and you have to know about, you know, modern day politics and all this, and you don't have to know that stuff. What you have to know about is the possibility of causal relation between adjacent clauses. You have to know that, well, you do have to know that demonstrations sometimes cause violence. You have to know relations between fear and not wanting something and prohibiting it if you're in authority. But these are, you know, these are not the deep esoteric knowledge about politics that Winograd said you had to know. They're kind of the ordinary meanings of words. So it seems to me that that particular example is an example where you don't need the you know, this esoteric knowledge. And, you know, I mean, another example is, one of the old examples was, you know, don't buy Jane a kite for her birthday. She already has a kite. She'll make you take it back. What's being taken back? You know, is it the one she already has, or the one, you know, you're going to buy her? And, you know, he said you have to know about birthday parties, and you got to know about ice cream and presents and balloons and everything else, and you don't. You just have to know about the word back. You know, that it presupposes some motion in this way. Well, what's the motion in this way? Well, it's the buying. Yeah.
So if you have a thought, you say that there is somebody who thinks.
Right.
And so I suppose that if you have a flight, you will have somebody who flies. But if you have a sentence like the flight has been cancelled, now somewhere in your system there will be that somebody is flying, right?
No, there's a possible flying event. And what cancel tells you is that possible flying event. So I mean, what language gives you is not reality. It's, I mean, that you kind of have to figure out separately. You know, what it gives you is the set of possible events and possible eventualities, and then you have to figure out from the structure of the sentence which of these things really exist in the real world. And so when you see the flight was canceled, you say, oh well. Cancellation really existed, that means the flight didn't really exist. The flying event didn't really exist. So basically, what you have in your logical form is a possible flying event and then you conclude about that possible flying event that it didn't really exist in the real world. But the existential quantification in the logical form is over possible eventualities and entities, possible individuals, not over actual. Sort of the actuality is a property of that possible individual. Sort of the way things are treated here. Or are you all out?
It's like
You're all out, Warren?